Here to begin today's program is the curator of ethnology for the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Dr. Eric Singleton.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our second day of seminars. I'd like to first thank our sponsors on the screen. The museum is able to provide quality education and experiences because of these organizations and individuals. And it was wonderful to honor some of these sponsors with a special breakfast this morning featuring Jeremy Lipking. Thank you, Jeremy, for wonderful demonstrations. We appreciate Panera Bread for providing this morning's refreshments. We also thank seminar sponsor Wendy and Steve Olshan. Folks, if you see someone with the sponsor ribbon, please be sure to thank them for their contributions to Prix de West. Later today at 1 p.m., please join us in the East Hallway for artist demonstrations by Scott Burdick, Andy Peters, Scott Tallman Powers, Sandy Scott, and Matt Smith. Also, for those interested in taking home a memento from this opening weekend, please visit the museum store located near the front entry. There you will find commemorative Prix de West bolos, catalogs, and scarves. While you're there, check out the museum store's trunk show. The museum will remain open until 7 o'clock this evening. We have another outstanding presentation this morning, followed by the highly anticipated Prix de West Purchase Award announcement at noon. We invite you to stay with us for the presentation of this award directly following our lunch break. And now for our morning seminar. After a 44-year career painting wildlife art, our presenter is no less passionate to learn and grow as an artist than he was with his first full-time day in late summer 1978. He considers his life work as an artist to be a journey. There have been a few paintings that have come close to matching his vision, but he continues to press on, hoping to match vision with reality. He believes his talent, opportunity, and passion to paint are gifts from God, and that it is his responsibility to pursue excellence in art and be a blessing to those who view his work. He is an award-winning Prix de West artist, including 6-time Wildlife Award Buyer's Choice Award and the 2021 Purchase Award recipient. Please welcome Prix de West artist Greg Beecham.
Well, good morning. He just said everything I planned, so this is going to be short. We'll got to get used to my little deal here. Let's just start with a little art humor. I'd like to tell you that I am very honored to be here. Lou and I love Prix de West. It's a highlight of our year, and the only thing is, about 8 months ago, I got a notification from Susan Patterson that I was going to give talk at Prix de West this year. There was no request, it was an order. And I instantly panicked and ran to the phone and called Randall Dutra and said, "Randy, you got to help me. You got to give me an interview." And he said, "Sorry, dude. I'm already talking to a couple people." And so I had to come up with something. And what I decided I would do this morning is talk process. That is how I go out in the field with the animals and then bring my photo reference home and design a painting. And I want to say, and I'm probably going to step on a few artists' toes here, but I really believe wildlife artists have more fun than anybody else. I mean, hey, Randy, we get to be out with wild critters. I get to go out with grizzly bears, and that's my job. And it's like me and my art buddies, will go out and we'll spend a day with animals, wild horses or elk or whatever. And then we come back and kind of sip a little whiskey and go through our files of photos and talk about design and everything. And it's just like, that's one of the coolest things I know of to do. So I'll get going here. I want to give, before I talk process, I felt I should give a little background on me and how I even came to be what I am. So we start with a little bit of that humor and move on to more humor. This is my family in the early 1960s, and I'm that sorry-looking chump right there. And I put that up there in part just because I wanted you to see my dad, Tom Beecham. And some of you knew Tom Beecham. He was an illustrator. He was a contemporary of Bob Kuhn. And he transitioned along with a lot of artists once they all started going into fine art. He didn't really transition as well as some of them, but I still believe he was a phenomenal illustrator. And so growing up with the son of an illustrator was very valuable to me in terms of both determining what I wanted to do as a career and learning how to do it. One of the things my dad would do is he would come home for supper. He worked like 7 days a week trying to support 6 kids on a illustrator's income. But after supper, he'd clear the table and he would lay out the magazines. And he would lay out Outdoor Life, because both him and Bob Kuhn illustrated for that. And so he'd lay out a Kuhn illustration, and he would lay out one of his own. And he would say, I want you to look at what Kuhn is doing here. And he's a designer. And he tried to explain what design meant. And I didn't know I was going to school, but I was. And then he would lay out his illustration, and he'd say, I consider myself an orchestrator. And he would show me how he was using these thrust counter thrusts and kind of a Z pattern to create. He called it a violent composition. It would be known as an active composition. So I'm going to school as a little kid and didn't even know it. And about 6th grade, he sat me down and taught me to draw. And I could, in 6th grade, draw photographically. I could take a photo and reproduce it, basically. And I mean, that's not art, but it was a foundation point from which I've spent the last however long, almost 60 years from then, learning what art is, and I still don't know. I'm still working on it. But that was another great foundation. But another thing my dad did, I'll show you. These are some of my dad's paintings. So he's pretty good. And he did a great job of putting humans and animals in action together. And as you could see, we have this thrust, counter thrust thing going on that's very, very active. And he did wildlife and Western. But what he would do is I'd get to go hunting with my dad. And I cherished my time with Dad. And the funny thing is, even though I killed a lot of rabbits and squirrels growing up to help feed the family, when we'd go deer hunting, I don't ever remember actually killing a deer. But what I do remember is spending hours, like from late afternoon, and we'd spot a doe, which we couldn't shoot. And he would just spend time, and we'd be talking, and he'd say, you see how the skylight lays down across her back? You see that blue? Now, if you do that when you paint, he says, that's going to give it a dimensional quality. And so he says, look, there's the grass, and it's giving this reflected light underneath, and again, gives dimension. And so I'm watching, and what I'm learning is how to see. And that's what he was showing me. He says, look at that hind leg. The deer stand on their toes. They don't stand on their feet like we do and like bears do, but that pointy thing on the leg when it comes up, that's the equivalent of our heel. So here I am going to school and never knew it. And so I owe my dad a lot. And then went through school, and just about 2 weeks before I graduated, my mom sat me down and said they were splitting up. So I split. I joined the Navy and spent about a year and 3 months on a guided missile destroyer, and then went to hospital corps school. And what we have here is me and my hospital corpsman buddies. We all I worked on a surgery ward with the guy on the right, and the guy in the middle was on the psych ward. But we loved going out hiking. He's a good man. We loved hiking, backpacking, and this is a scene we used to go up on Mount Rainier and build igloos and stay in them, and so better than any tent. An igloo is awesome. But so that's what I did when I was in the Navy, and then got out of the Navy and went to school at Southern Oregon State College and learned nothing, but I met my wife, which that was very, very important. I did learn one thing, I should say, in an art history class. And going back to that active composition of my dad, there's a thing we talked about, in the early periods of art. Neoclassical was a very staid, stoic, unmoving composition. Basically, if you think of Michelangelo's David, very straight up and down, horizontals, verticals, geometric shapes. And we move on to the Baroque period, and it was very Dionysian, they call it, very, very active composition. So it just kind of things like that, building my little repertoire, not having any formal education. I just kind of picked pieces and read books. But what I did do is after Lou graduated from college, she graduated with a degree in math. She graduated in the spring of 1978. We went back and we stayed with my mom. And Lou worked with my mother, and I stayed there home, and I painted. And I painted all week long, and then I'd go up to my dad's, about an hour drive, and he would critique my work. And so that's how I got started, was just Dad teaching me how to paint. And every time I'd go up there, I'd put something on his easel, and then he would just kind of stand back like this. And it'd be a good 5 minutes of saying nothing. And then he'd finally go, "You're coming along. But," and that but was how I learned, because he started tearing it apart and telling me this and that needed to improve and everything. And I say every time, but at one time it didn't work that way. I brought the piece in and I set it up there, and he just looked at me and just started in on me yelling, "You cannonballed it!" And I was like, "What? What's cannonball?" And it was just like I'd messed up. I mean, it was total explosion, no design, no nothing. And I remember that, and so I don't think I've ever totally cannonballed anything since because of what Dad said. But here I am, this Navy veteran, crying my eyes out going home. So anyway, moving on. We moved to Wyoming in 1997, and so this is a few years after that. And we've been there 25 years, and this is the family. And I'm going to go through all the personal stuff as quickly as I can, but I wanted you to see the gang. Okay, many of you know my dear wife, Lou. What you may not know is that she is a killer, and you don't want to mess with Lou. And this morning I'm trying to get ready, and I put my sport coat on, and I'm going, and she goes, "Lose the jacket." And it's like hiding. I get to wear it, and no, lose the jacket. And I said, "They're going to see my big butt." She goes, "Don't turn around." But meanwhile, Randall had told me I need to own the stage, so I got to go like this. I'm going to own this piece of real estate right here. So, where am I here? Okay, I just wanted to prove to everybody that I have cowboyed a little bit, and at least I have the outfit. And, excuse me, we put in about 5 cords of wood every year for just heat. It gets cold in Wyoming, and we used to go up in the mountains to get all our wood, but I'm only good for about 2 hours at a time anymore, so we have a next-door neighbor's a logger, and he just brings us truckloads of wood now, and so I do the cutting, and Lou does the splitting. I had a shoulder replaced in 2015, so I can't use a splitting maul anymore, and Lou doesn't either. We have a 25-ton splitter, so hydraulic splitter. But we work as a team, and one of the things with Lou and I is she retired almost a year ago, and she's having a ton of fun, and I'm having a ton of fun watching her. And in September, we'll celebrate our 45th, and we're having more joy and more peace together than we've ever had, and we love going hiking, and well, thank you. Lou loves rocks, and loves rocks, and so we'll go up in the mountains, and she will get into the river and just walk, and just finding petrified wood and arrowheads and stuff, and she's just looking down, and I'm walking along the shore with my bear gun looking for grizzlies, and so it's symbiotic. And so we're having fun together. I didn't want to choke up. Proud of this. I'm on the right, my son's on the left, both about 20 years old. I'd already been overseas, like I said, on a guided missile destroyer, and he was about to go on his first deployment to Iraq, and he's eventually gone on twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan. He is a master sergeant in the Army National Guard and has a full-time position in Wyoming with the Department of Criminal Investigation as an analyst. He's married, and we have 2 little granddaughters, and so very proud of my boy. And my beautiful daughter, my baby girl. She came into my studio one day and said, "Dad, I want you to teach me to draw." And I figured it'd be like me and my dad. And so I went through all this stuff, I thought, well, we'll do something where, I'll use a rose, and then we'll get more complex, because with a rose, you got to make it look right, but it doesn't have to be perfect to feel satisfaction. So I had that, and I wanted her to use pencil and pen and ink and Prismacolor pencil, and I got her all set up, spent about an hour just talking to her about process, and she just looked at me and goes, "I don't want to do that." I mean, it was like too much work. So I didn't want to bother her. I just kind of went over to my easel, and I said, "Okay," and I just started painting. And about 15 minutes later, I just started hearing this scratch, 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 scratch. And so I didn't say a word. I didn't do anything. I just painted for about an hour and a half, and then went back to see what she had done. And it was unbelievable. She understood abstract art concepts that professionals I know don't have. And I just went home that night and told Lou it would be criminal if we don't send her to art school. And so we did, and she got a degree in interior design at Savannah College of Art and Design, and is now an interior designer in just north of Atlanta in Buckhead, Georgia. So both my kids have the artistic talent. If you go to the Du Bois, Wyoming grocery store, you look across the top of the grocery store in the back, and it's my son's drawings still there. He graduated back in 2004, but his drawings are still in the grocery store. But they also saw how hard it was to make a living at being an artist, so they picked different routes, and we love them, and we're very proud of them. This is my little studio. I found out from a lady in Tulsa one time, from looking at a postcard, that it was built before 1929. And it's gone through several iterations, being a home. It was a rodeo glove factory at one point, and so now it's my little place. It's in town, and we live about 5 miles out of town, so especially when the kids were in school, I was right close there, and it worked out nice. And this is the inside. I've often thought it'd be kind of nice to have one of those big, giant, fancy studios, and then I just realized that in 6 months it's just going to look like this anyway, so I'm good. And speaking of that painting, I had my shoulder replaced 2 weeks before I started painting that, and so they had told me, and I just laid in a easy chair that whole time, but they told me after 2 weeks you'll be fine. So that I had, deadlines. Prix de West, they're cruel. They have really strict deadlines for us artists. So I'm there, with stitches from here to here, painting on that piece like this, but it worked out. Okay, this is kind of a mundane shot, but I thought you might be interested. I went to Africa with my son, who was 10 years old at the time, in 1996. Wonderful time, but we met some neat people. And I met this young fellow while we were there, and then lost track of him. And several years later, I started seeing these gorgeous toneless works, and the name Brent Cotton. And I thought, Brent? Could that be my Brent? And it was. And so this is youthful Brent Cotton right there. And so we've caught up and become great friends since then. And so kind of cool. My son just absolutely adored him. He was his hero during that trip. Okay, so I got the little shameless association here, painting alongside the well-known, awesome Bill Reese up at the Northwest Rendezvous group years ago. Okay, I was out, a bunch of us artists, I should be looking, I can see right there, went up with a guy, dentist in Alaska, who owned a boat, and he took us all up on a trip through the inland passage, and we painted and just had a great time. And Bob Kuhn was on the trip. Sue McGarry was from Southwest Art, came to write an article on it. And me and this guy went out and shot a bunch of these dusky Canada geese. They're a beautiful, large goose with dark bellies, and we just had a great time. And then when we're done, he went out to pick up the geese. And what I didn't know, I'm just twiddling my thumbs on the shore, is that he's nearly dying with the tide coming in, and he almost didn't make it back. And so, he got back, and then he sang songs about our hunting prowess all the way back, and you all will be happy to know that Walt Mattia is still with us, and so he and I had a great time hunting. The other day he told me that when anybody asks him, have you ever had a near-death experience that you can laugh at today, he says, that's at the top of my list. And so I'm happy that I didn't kill him, number one, and I have never been asked that question. I don't know. Okay, I just put this up to show you I can paint people. I like painting people. I like painting portraits, but I don't have the personality to deal with people. So I like people, but I'm bashful. And you know how you'd have to be with calling people and getting them to pose, or even they want their portrait done, and they may not like it and stuff. So I don't deal with it. Animals are easy to deal with. And I love being out with the animals, so that's what I do. That's my daughter when she was little. So I also plein air paint, but not like some of these guys that are out constantly. And you may see in my artwork, I like the niche. I mean, I've painted the big scenes, and we all have to be able to do that, but I like close in. So if I'm outside, I'm looking for something like that where I can just kind of drill, use my drawing skills that I learned in 6th grade and just have fun with that. So that's kind of what I'll look for. If there's a wagon around or a farm equipment or something like that, everybody's painting the mountain, and I'll paint that. And, somebody sets up a still life. I love kind of sinking my teeth into just doing something like that. So I do sketch a lot, and these aren't good, but what they are is just basically 20 to 30-minute sketches. And so it just helps keep the drawing skills going. And I put that one in because I don't do a good job of fitting things on the page very well sometimes, and so we're losing the butt tangent off of that thing. But it just shows you why when I transfer an image from my design to my canvas, I'll make a grid so that when I draw it in, I get all the proportions right, and so I don't. That's a bit of a problem-solving method that in the times. Classic art times, they'd actually make wire grids and stick their chin on it so they could do that same thing. So I figure it's time-honored. It's okay. Just a couple of these sketches that I do. Like I said, I'm just going for gestures and seeing good shapes, and just a little bighorn there. Okay, so let's fast forward 25 years, early 2000s. My career is about done. It's my outgo is exceeding my income. My work stunk. I hated it. I didn't know how to get from here to there. I didn't know how to talk to people like, I have artists come to me, will you mentor me? That's great, I love it, but I didn't have the wherewithal personally to go do that, so it wasn't working. And I was about to, Lou was a business manager of our local school district at the time. I got to get a drink of water, sorry. Lou just bought me this Father's Day cup. So I was about to ask Lou if the school had a janitor job opening because I always wanted to contribute and I was not contributing. And so it was like the dream is about done. And so two things happened almost simultaneously. I don't believe they're coincidence. I believe that the Lord was blessing me, bringing me up from the pit. But, okay, can we get back to that there? What I did was I said, okay, I've got 2 shows coming up. I'll make a decision about asking Lou after I see what the shows do. So I went to the Southeastern Wildlife Exposition in Charleston. I took 9 paintings, 5 big ones, 4 small ones. The 4 small ones sold, so okay, artists usually go through these iterations that shows like high hopes to start with, and then I hope I sell this, this, and this, and by the end it's like, man, if I can make expenses, I'll be happy. So I kind of made expenses at that show, and 2 weeks later, the Charlie Russell show was coming up, and I thought I can take 5 paintings and maybe do 1 more. I can take 6 large paintings and probably sell nothing, or I can do something different. And I decided I would try to paint a painting a day before the show and see what happens. And that did 2 things. Number 1, it revitalized my career. It was amazing. And secondly, it got me to a place artistically that I didn't know how to get to. I'd always looked at Bob Kuhn's work and loved it, and everybody says he's loose, and I know, no, he's working from small shapes to big shapes. So the big shapes are just as beautifully abstract and wonderful as the small shapes. And so that's what I tried to do, is just use my drawing skills, nail the focal point, and then move out to larger shapes from there. And it was the best work I'd ever done. And so it was amazing to me. And so I took these pieces, there's a few of them here, with me to the Russell show and sold got 11 of them done. I sold all 11. And I thought, okay, this is telling me something. And a fellow came through the show, up at the Russell show. If you haven't been there, you show in a hotel and they clean out all the rooms, and so everybody comes into your room and looks. And this gentleman came in, and he was so encouraging. He just was helping. He gave me hope. And you all probably know Bill Kerr, and he's one of the kindest gentlemen who ever lived, and he just gave me hope that day. So I went to Jackson, Wyoming, and I thought I'll try to get into a gallery again. I'd been in galleries there before, and they'd stuck my work in a closet, and nothing ever happened. And so I went to the D. Tomaso Gallery, and there was a young fellow named Greg Fulton running the gallery, and I asked him to take me on. And he now owns Astoria Fine Art in Jackson. And so for 6 months, I painted a painting a day. And that got me going again. But there was another thing that was happening during that same time, and that is I became a guest artist with a group called the Northwest Rendezvous. And with the Northwest Rendezvous, you can be a guest artist for 2 years, and then you become eligible to be voted on to be a member. And 2 years came, and I was not voted in as a member. And of course, that stung. But they invited me for another year as a guest artist. And as a guest artist, you brought 2 paintings, and the members had 4. And I brought this piece with me, and another forgettable piece. I don't even remember what it was. And this painting became a career maker for me. Not only did I get voted in as a guest artist, but there was a group of people who came to the show, came to the camp out. We had a week camp out, then everybody had fun painting together. And this group's name was the Prix de West Society. And they came and enjoyed everything with us. And then in the middle of the show, this dear lady in the society, Lois Joseph, I'm going to break up again. She walked up to me and in her beautiful Oklahoma accent said, "We want you in our show." I about fell to the floor. I'd been trying for years applying to Prix de West, and my last rejection letter said, "Dear Mr. Buchara." I mean, I had no clue who I even was, and all of a sudden I'm in. And this was in August, and she said, but the thing is, all the slots were full for next June, so it'll be the year after. So I ended up having to wait almost 2 years, but that was those 2 things happening, the painting a day and getting into Prix de West, all of a sudden I was lifted out of the pit and a new life and a new chance. And so I'm going to leave my process there because that's just kind of been growing and building ever since. And as was said earlier, I still feel like this is a learning curve. It's a journey. I'm still passionate about figuring things out. I'm basically feeling like first base. But what I want to do is talk a little process. And again, I have a lot of fun. We have, where we live, what they say is the largest bighorn sheep population in the lower 48. So 20 minutes away, I'm up with the bighorns. About a year and a half ago, I drove up there hoping to find something going on in December. It was December 2nd, I think, 2020. And December is when the rams go into rut. And I got out of my truck, and there was a couple of guys there, and so I asked if they'd seen anything. And about the time one guy was saying no, we heard this crack, and it just echoed down the canyon. And we all knew exactly what it was. It was bighorn sheep slamming heads. And so it was way up on a hillside above a cliff, and so we all hiked up there, and we found them. Oh, that's just kind of a cool gesture. I love cool gestures. But anyway, we found them, and they were in this stand of junipers up on top of this cliff. And I took this, I think I was kind of leaning over the shoulder of a guy because we were all closed in, hoping we'd get shots. And I'm hoping, oh man, I hope they keep cracking heads, and I hope they get out into the open. Maybe I can get some images. And so, yeah, they don't hold still for us. So trying to paint animals from life is a bit of a challenge. So we wildlife artists do use photographs. So they did. They moved out into the open, and I got excited. And within the next 2 hours, these two rams probably whacked their heads 50 times. I mean, it was crazy. And so I'm watching them, and they're so fast. It's faster than your eye can see. And it's not like other animals when they come, like a mule deer will come in to fight, and his ears will be laid back over its neck, and he'll come in, and another one, and then you go right at it. You know what's going to happen. These guys, they'll whack, and then they're like this for a few seconds. And then they're acting nonchalant, like nothing's going on. And that's when you got to be ready, because as soon as they act like they're maybe going to be feeding for a sec, then it's boom, once again, and it's just so quick. So you have to be totally ready with the camera. So about 10 times into this, I'm finally getting the hang of it. And I'm looking for, oh, there's a guy with a bloody nose. It's amazing what they do. But I'm looking for composition. How can this work as a painting? And we have a problem with this because what we have is two equal-sized masses on either side of what would be the canvas, and it ends up being competing focal points. And so it's a cool photo, but it won't work as a painting. And there's a ways of breaking the rule and making it work, and that might, maybe a person could crop it or bring some stuff in front of one of them. I'll have to mention a piece in the show that the artist did this. He had what would be two competing focal points, two figures. It's Morgan Weisling's piece. But he solved that problem, broke the rule, and yet made it work so brilliantly by using value, the highest key value being the difference between dark and light, very high key on the blouse. The horse's face is set back a little, being a little bit bluer, a little cooler, and a little bit darker. And then the male figure is quite dark, and he brought a larger mass behind it with the horse so that it ended up not competing with the focal point, which is the young lady. And by doing that, you can have two figures there, and yet this one is where your eye goes and it's not bouncing. So he broke the rule and made it work, whereas this would be very difficult to break that rule with. So I'm thinking, I got to get angles. And so I found one with angles, but we also have a problem because my focal point is a big white butt. And so, even if you clean it all up, that's what your eye's going to go to. So it's like making decisions. I come home with a couple thousand photos. I mean, I take a lot of pictures, and I'm going through them all trying to, what is going to work to paint? And so I came up with, oops, that's not it. I thought, this is interesting. because there's no competing focal point. It's full of action and drama, and I'm thinking, okay, that might work, but there's some things I've got to do, and so I'll use Photoshop to manipulate. So watch what happens to, you see how I kind of took that angle down, and it even has more action this way, I think, but the background's pretty boring. So I go in my reference photos, and I'm looking at some of the mountains that we have around in photos, and I thought this would be good. I kind of cloned that one off. So what I had is this kind of downward thrust right here, so that when I put my image into it, we start to get this thrust, counter thrust, active composition going. And so now I sort of have to fill in the blanks, so I put some background into it. But one of the things my dad always told me is put feet on the ground. And that does two things. Number one, it gives an animal a sense of space in the design, and it also proves you can do it, because painting feet on the ground is hard. So I went ahead, and also these, as you could tell, are not huge sheep. And so I wanted to make them a little bit bigger, so I went ahead and put some feet, another leg right there, and I took horns from other sheep that I had that I thought could match up, and they don't match up perfectly, but I'm able to extrapolate. And so I thought, okay, even though it's not complete, I'm ready to paint this. And so I went ahead, and that's the painting that I did from it. And it's a fairly large piece. So that's my process through being in the field, to home, to design, to painting. And it's exciting to be a wildlife artist. So that's kind of, I hope it's not boring, because that's what my rest of my talk is about, is process. So, had a pretty neat mountain lion photo here. I've only seen maybe 4 mountain lions in the wild, and almost every time it's just been just a few seconds at the most. And so trying to get photos of mountain lions, wild mountain lions, to use is difficult. And you can go to a zoo, but they're almost always fat and don't look wild. And so what we wildlife artists do is there's a few game farms around, and there's one wonderful game farm up in Kalispell, Montana. And they used to take their animals down to like Zion National Park and down near Mesa Verde in Colorado, and I think this was Colorado. And so they brought this cat down, and you can't really see it, but what they do is their trainers will put pieces of meat different places, so the cat climbed down that thing to get a piece of meat. And I liked that gesture. I'm always looking for interesting gestures with animals, but obviously you don't see a face, and there's some issues with it, so I've got to manipulate it. I need a head that's going to work for it, so I start looking through my files, and so I find a head. But the head is a male, and the body of it, the first image was a female, and males are much bigger in the shoulders, so you sort of have to manipulate. I enlarged the size of the shoulders. I took the body and sort of created a little more line quality with it, and so played with that. And now I need a background, because these rocks are okay, but they don't really interest me. So I went through all my files trying to find rocks that cat could fit on. So I found some rocks from a formation that I'd seen in Yellowstone, and I thought, that fits, but they're boring. So I'm thinking again, where do I know some interesting rocks? And so I thought of a rock formation I knew between Lander, Wyoming, and Jeffrey City, so about 100 miles from the house. So I drove down there, and I found these rocks. And as you can see, it's got a wonderful patina on these rocks that I really liked, but there's no place for the cat to put his feet. So essentially what I did was, with Photoshop, I skinned the surface of these rocks and put them on the rocks that I had the cat on. And it's not perfect, but again, I can extrapolate where it needs to be. So that's the design I did. And then you saw it earlier that I did the painting, and it's sold here in the show. So is this boring you? Is this okay? Okay. Okay. So, I have a Wolverine story. I have a confession. I've been bad with animals. I've pushed too hard with grizzlies and moose and animals, and I'm trying not to. It's you get your blood up and you want to get the shot, and all of a sudden you're way too close and you're in trouble. And I should be, one of the stupid park trick people, and I'm not, thank God. But I'm trying to do better. So, I had a Wolverine encounter. A friend of mine in town, Du Bois, Wyoming, used to work up at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and he flew me up there a couple times because he had a gazillion miles from going back and forth to see his wife and go to work. And so he took me up there in the summer once and once in the winter. And during the summer, he drove me down what was called the Haul Road. Prudhoe Bay, I was right there up on, I guess it's the Bering Sea, up in the very northern part of Alaska. And the Haul Road goes all the way down to the south part of Alaska, and it's the only road. It's the same road as the TV show Ice Road Truckers. And so anyway, we're driving along and went down and then coming back, and we see this animal out in the muskeg, and it's bouncing around. It's got this thing in its mouth and can't figure out what it is. And so I said, when you pull up, there's a side road, and there's hardly any side roads up there. So we pulled up, and I walked up the side road to try to see what it was. And this thing picked up whatever it was that he was playing with and ran right at me. And so I'm standing there. There's a little reflector post here. And from me to the stairs over there, he walks up onto the road, and he starts to walk up the road. And here's where dummy me comes in, is I don't want to stop photographing, so I yelled to him. And so he kind of turned and looked at me, and he put the thing down, and he walked across the road, and then he walked up the road a little bit, and on the other side, turned and started coming at me. And so he's walking along the grass on the other side of the road, walked back up onto the road, and I'm getting shots, and I'm enjoying it. I've lost all these photos. I only have a few left, and so that's why I can't show you all of them. But he's from me to the podium, and all of a sudden, I'm worried. I don't even have a pocket knife, and these things take on grizzly bears. And so, I told Steve Kestrel about it, and he got me reading these books from a study, some biologists, Wolverine biologists in Glacier, and reading how ferocious they really are. I knew they were, but it was worse than I thought. It's like I could have died. So somebody should ask me if I can laugh at my near-death experiences. But anyway, he's there. And I didn't know what to do. If you run from a predator, of course, they got you. That's just, you're dead. And so I just went like this. I went, I know. And he looked at me, and he looked back at his prize, which was a caribou leg. And he looked back at me, and then it was almost like, you're not worth my time. And I tend to anthropomorphize, but he went back and picked up his leg and walked up the road. And so I ended up doing this painting. I got some pictures of the muskeg and put him in it, and that's the pose when he first turned around and looked at me. I don't have the photo still. And I kind of juiced up the leg. It was pretty dried out, and I'm thinking, what's he going to do eating on this thing? And so I gave him some meat to eat. But what I found out reading the stories that Steve had recommended is that these wolverines have such strong jaws that they'll just break through these bones and get a pretty good meal out of all the marrow in there. So it was still a real prize for it, and the title of this piece was The Prize, and some Michigan Wolverine alumni ended up buying it. Okay, I got it. This is a fun one. I was invited by a group called NAFA, North American Falconers Association, to Farson, Wyoming. And Farson is, as Grant knows, out in the middle of the Sagebrush Sea in southwest Wyoming. Our kids used to play them in sports, so we were kind of familiar with it. But they were out there with their golden eagles. There's about 15 of the top falconers in the country brought their golden eagles out to hunt white-tailed jackrabbits. And the way it worked is that the falconer would be in the middle, and we'd all be lined up on either side, maybe 7 or 8 people on either side, and we'd just start walking through the sagebrush. And pretty soon a white-tailed jackrabbit would jump, and he'd release the eagle. And I figured they'd just go up and down, but they'd just go take a beeline right to him. And you'd almost think like this is not a fair fight. But these jackrabbits are some of the best athletes in nature, and they had 2 methods primarily of avoiding these eagles. The first one was that as soon as the eagle was about to hit, they'd stop, and the eagle would land, and they'd kind of what just happened, and they're too slow to get back up, so the rabbit would just, like, they're hares officially, but I'll call them rabbits. They just kind of watch as the rabbit just bounces away. Another thing that they would do is they would jump. I know. And the eagle's just kind of left there again. And I put this montage. But I mean, look at the athleticism of this thing. That's about 20 feet in the air, this little rabbit, and he comes down perfectly on his feet and just wanders off. And so this was pretty cool. And basically what ended up happening is the eagles had about a 1 in 7 success ratio. And what we found out from, people told us is that's about the same as the wild eagles. And what was interesting too is while we were doing this, the wild eagles came and they're circling above because they know something's up. But anyway, there was this one incident here, and the next day, it was 2 days, the second day, and we were all out doing this, walking along, and something happened to where this rabbit I can't remember, but he turned or something, and the crowd just kind of closed in front of me, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to get this shot. And all of a sudden, it just kind of opened about 3 feet right there as that eagle came down. And so there was this kind of series. As you can see, there's a person. So just like with a split second, it just was through there. And so there was one photo right in the middle of it that I thought, there's potential with this. The problem is that there's no information in here to make a painting out of it. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I started going through all of the photos, again, thousands, and this is why I take thousands, to see what I might find in all of my photos from that trip that I can fill in the blanks a little bit and make a painting out of it. So what I did was I cut and pasted and, put a head, put the wings, and you can see that there's no articulation here between the wings and the body, and that could be an issue, but my saving grace on that was dust. So I painted it all, and I like to paint wet on wet, start to finish, and I knew that it would look crappy if I painted it all in, let it dry, and then tried to scumble dust over it. So what I did was I painted quite a bit of detail. Well, I'll go right to the painting. Quite a bit of detail, and then took a wide bristle brush and loaded the side of it, and then kind of held it in my hand really loosely, so if I was doing this, the thing would just be going like that, and just kind of took and just laid as gently as I could that dust on it. And I laid it a little bit darker than ultimately what I wanted, so it would create a little bit dimension, and then just once again with a little less, just laid a little bit more highlight, and ended up, I call it Feathers and Dust. And it was in the show here, is now in the Briscoe Museum. And so I felt, that it was successful. I put an extra foot on it and changed the head on the rabbit. And so that's how I do a painting. Okay, I'm supposed to quit here pretty quick, but let's see. All right, I'm going to go through one more quick. Is that all right? I was driving up to a game farm in Montana, and along I-90, I think it is, there's trains going by as I'm driving, these mile-long trains, and I'm thinking, how cool would it be if I could find a railroad car next to the road where I could photograph it, because I really like the idea of mechanical and organic, or put together, the textural differences. And so I found these train cars. I was going up to the bison range. I always stop in on my way up there just because the white-tailed deer in November are in rut and got to see them. And there they are, right next to the road. So I took a bunch of pictures, and I thought, what am I going to... This is one case I usually let the animals tell me what to paint, but this time I'm letting the train, and I'm thinking, what can I use? Can I put antelope in there, deer, whatever? And I thought, I think a fox could work. What if a fox is coming out from under those wheels? So I put a fox in, and I changed the head on it, and then I painted it. So I'm just having fun with animals, and I think my time is done. So I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.